What if the next impeachable offense didn't happen in the Oval Office, but on the world stage? What if pieces became a brand, democracy a subscription service, and global governance a family business? Donald Trump is no longer just flirting with authoritarian rhetoric. He is driving it at an international scale. By hijacking a United Nations resolution and reinventing it into a private peace council with himself at the center, Trump isn't ending wars. He's auditioning for something far more ambitious: unchecked power without elections, accountability, or limits. This isn't diplomacy. It's a monarchy in beta. And yes, it's impeachable. Resolution 2803 was supposed to be boring, technocratic, narrow, the kind of United Nations document that puts diplomats to sleep and reassures the world that adults are still in the room. Passed on November 17th, it focused on one thing only: stabilizing Gaza after the October 2025 ceasefire, 2 years, limited mandate, and international force. A temporary peace council designed to coordinate reconstruction funds until the Palestinian Authority could regain administrative control. No crowns, no thrones, no dynasties, just bureaucracy and guardrails. Donald Trump looked at that document and saw something else entirely. Not a peace mechanism, but an opening. Not a framework, but a loophole. Resolution 2803 did not hand anyone power. It described responsibility. Trump's move was to perform a political magic trick, replace responsibility with authority, limits with permanence, and international oversight with personal command. That is how a dry legal text became a Trojan horse. The resolution clearly described the Peace Council as transitional, task-specific, and bound by international law. Trump's proposed version removed every one of those constraints. Gaza vanished from the charter, time limits evaporated, legal accountability dissolved. What remained was a shiny new entity labeled international, structured like a monarchy, and controlled by a single individual who answers to no electorate, no legislature, and no court. The trick was branding. By keeping the name, Trump borrowed legitimacy while discarding substance. This is not improvisation. This is a familiar Trump maneuver scaled to global proportions. He has always treated rules as decorative and institutions as props. Courts become enemies when they rule against him. Elections become rigged when he loses. Now the United Nations becomes inefficient when it does not revolve around him. Resolution 2803 offered cooperation. Trump countered with capture. The most revealing detail is what the charter does not say. It does not mention humanitarian corridors. It does not mention civilian protection. It does not mention Gaza at all. Instead, it focuses obsessively on control: who admits members, who removes them, who holds the money, who inherits the throne. This is not peacekeeping language. It is corporate governance rewritten by a strong man with delusions of grandeur. Trump's defenders argue that nothing illegal has happened yet. That is the point. Abuse of power does not begin with tanks in the streets. It begins with normalization, with the quiet suggestion that international law is optional and personal authority is more efficient. Resolution 2803 becomes useful, not because of what it authorizes, but because of what it allows Trump to claim. He did not invent the Peace Council. They say the United Nations did. That claim is false, but politically convenient. By re-engineering a collective security concept into a private hierarchy, Trump crossed a critical line. He transformed multilateral consent into unilateral command. That is not diplomacy. It is institutional identity theft. The United Nations was not replaced. It was impersonated. This is why Resolution 2803 matters. Not because it failed, but because it was exploited. A document designed to limit power was used to justify accumulating it. That inversion is the crime. And it sets the stage for something far more dangerous than a failed peace plan. A precedent that global governance can be privatized, personalized, and passed down like property. The Trojan horse is already inside the walls. Every autocracy begins the same way. Not with tanks, but with flowcharts. Before the uniforms come the organizational charts. Before the slogans come the bylaws. And before the strong man declares himself indispensable, he quietly designs a system where no one can remove him. That is exactly what Donald Trump attempted with his so-called Peace Council. This is not chaos. It is architecture. At the center of this structure sits the chair, singular, permanent, untouchable. The chair is not elected, not confirmed, not reviewed. The chair vetoes everything. Every vote, every decision, every collective action lives or dies at the pleasure of one man. This is not a flaw in the design. This is the design. In democratic institutions, veto power is constrained, shared, or balanced. Here, it is absolute. A council that can be overruled by one individual is not a council. It is a stage. Membership follows the same logic. No criteria, no standards, no legal benchmarks. Entry depends entirely on invitation or approval by the chair. Removal is just as arbitrary. A nation can pay its fee, follow the rules, comply with every request, and still be expelled on a whim. That is not governance. That is fealty. This turns sovereign states into clients and diplomacy into a loyalty test. Then comes the most revealing clause of all, succession. Trump alone reserves the right to appoint his successor. No election, no review, no emergency mechanism, no collective consent. Power is inherited, not earned. This single provision destroys any remaining illusion that this structure resembles international cooperation. It is dynastic by design. The language may wear a suit, but the logic wears a crown. Supporters insist this is innovative leadership. History disagrees. This model is painfully familiar. It mirrors corporate autocracies, kleptocratic regimes, and personalized power systems from Moscow to Riyadh. The difference is scale. Trump is not content with controlling a party, a corporation, or a country. He is experimenting with a parallel system of global authority, floating above constitutions, treaties, and voters. The financial mechanics complete the picture. Billion-dollar membership fees controlled by the chair, without oversight or auditing, transform diplomacy into a toll road. Pay to enter, pay to stay, pay to be heard. This rewards regimes that can move money quietly and punishes democracies constrained by law, transparency, and public scrutiny. Corruption is not a side effect. It is the fuel. This architecture does something more dangerous than concentrating power. It normalizes it. It teaches the world that democracy is inefficient, accountability is optional, and permanence is stability. It tells other strongmen that elections are inconvenient rituals and institutions exist to be bent, not respected. When Trump jokes about being a dictator, this is the blueprint behind the punchline. And here's the quiet horror. None of this requires violence. No coups, no declarations of emergency. Just signatures, charters, and applause from those who benefit. A global autocracy does not arrive screaming. It arrives organized, polished, and smiling for the cameras. By the time people realize this structure was never about peace, it may already be operational. That is the danger of architecture. Once built, it does not argue. It simply stands there, daring someone to tear it down. Every scam eventually asks for money. Not loudly, not crudely, but with a smile and a justification. Donald Trump's proposed peace council does not hide this step. It puts it in writing. $1 billion for membership, payable up front, controlled entirely by the chair. No oversight, no independent auditing, no guarantees. Welcome to diplomacy, Trump style. This is where the project stops pretending to be about peace and starts revealing its real function. A fee that large is not symbolic. It is exclusionary by design. Only wealthy states, petro-monarchies, authoritarian regimes, and countries comfortable moving money discreetly can participate. Democracies with budget transparency, legislative approval requirements, and public accountability are instantly handicapped. The system selects for corruption before the first meeting even begins. Trump's defenders call it funding. That argument collapses on contact with reality. Legitimate international organizations collect dues through formulas, oversight committees, and legal safeguards. Here, the money flows directly into an entity controlled by one individual with unilateral authority over its use. That is not funding. That is tribute. When access to influence depends on a personal payment, the line between governance and bribery disappears completely. The structure creates a simple equation: pay and comply, or lose access. Membership can be revoked at the discretion of the chair, even after payment. There are no contractual protections, no arbitration mechanisms, no appeals process. This turns every billion-dollar contribution into a gamble dependent on personal favor. That is not how treaties work. That is how protection rackets work. Foreign leaders understand this language instantly. Vladimir Putin's suggestion that Russia could pay using seized American funds was not a joke. It was a signal. He recognized the system for what it is, transactional power without moral constraints. In this world, loyalty matters more than law, and cash speaks louder than principles. Strongmen thrive here. Democracies suffocate. This model also invites direct foreign influence over an American political figure operating outside constitutional constraints. A private entity led by a former president, funded by foreign governments, exercising global authority, and insulated from oversight, is a textbook case of corruption risk. The founders warned about this explicitly. Emoluments were not a theoretical concern. They were a prediction. The genius of the scheme, if one can call it that, lies in its camouflage. It does not demand bribes in envelopes. It invoices them. It does not threaten openly. It implies consequences quietly. Countries that pay are rewarded with access, stability, and protection. Those that do not are marginalized, expelled, or ignored. Corruption becomes procedural, sanitized by paperwork and press releases. Even more dangerous is the precedent. If this is allowed, global governance becomes a marketplace where influence is auctioned and peace is leased. International law becomes optional for those who can afford exemptions. The message is clear, values are negotiable, principles are flexible, and money is the only universal language. This is not an accident. Trump has always treated institutions as monetizable assets: universities, charities, hotels, politics. The Peace Council is simply the next upgrade. The price is higher, the scale is larger, the consequences are global. When membership fees replace shared rules, bribery becomes policy. And when bribery becomes policy, impeachment is no longer political. It is necessary. The most revealing part of the Peace Council Charter is not the money, the veto power, or the absence of oversight. It is the inheritance clause, buried in bureaucratic language, is a concept that should stop every democratic society: cold succession by personal appointment. Donald Trump alone decides who comes next. No election, no confirmation, no consent. Power does not transfer through law. It transfers through bloodline or favor. That single design choice exposes the project for what it truly is: a dynasty in international clothing. This is where the structure stops pretending to be innovative and starts resembling something medieval. Monarchies rule by birth. Republics rule by choice. Trump is attempting to merge the two, keeping the spectacle of modern governance while restoring the logic of inherited power. When the potential successor is his own son, subtlety vanishes entirely. This is not leadership development, it is estate planning. Trump has always treated public office as an extension of personal brand. Hotels carried his name. Universities sold his image. Campaigns functioned like loyalty programs. The Peace Council is simply the ultimate upgrade. Instead of monetizing properties or politics, it monetizes global influence. Instead of licensing a surname, it licenses authority. The world becomes a franchise. The danger is not hypothetical. A private international entity controlled by one family exists outside every democratic safeguard. Voters cannot remove it. Legislatures cannot regulate it. Courts cannot restrain it. Even future presidents are powerless against it. A democratically elected American leader could find themselves negotiating with a parallel authority run by a former president and his heirs, funded by foreign governments, and immune to constitutional limits. That is not continuity. That is sabotage. This structure also rewrites loyalty. Allegiance shifts from institutions to individuals, from laws to personalities, from nations to surnames. That is the defining trait of authoritarian systems. It is how power survives defeat: lose an election, keep the apparatus; lose public support, keep the money; lose legitimacy, keep the throne. Supporters claim this is merely symbolic, that Trump is exaggerating for attention. History warns against that complacency. Authoritarian projects rarely announce themselves as permanent at the start. They normalize gradually. First, the leader becomes indispensable. Then the institution becomes irreplaceable. Finally, succession becomes inevitable. By the time the crown appears, the public has already accepted the logic behind it. The insult to American democracy is total. The United States was founded in rebellion against inherited power. Generations fought wars, passed amendments, and built institutions to ensure that no family could ever claim ownership over governance again. This project does not just ignore that history, it mocks it. It exports the very system America rejected and sells it back to the world as stability. What makes this especially dangerous is how clean it looks. No tanks, no coups, no emergency decrees, just charters, boards, and press releases. A dynasty assembled with legal vocabulary and marketed as peace. That is how modern authoritarianism operates. It does not overthrow democracy. It outgrows it. If democracy is ruled by the people, this is rule by inheritance. If accountability is the foundation of legitimacy, this is legitimacy without accountability. The Trump family business was never content with hotels and towers. Now it wants permanence, global permanence, and once dynasties return, history shows they do not leave willingly. At this point, the question is no longer whether Donald Trump crossed a line. The question is how many lines were erased in the process. What began as an opportunistic reinterpretation of a United Nations resolution has metastasized into something far more serious. A private power structure designed to operate above law, beyond accountability, and outside democracy itself. That is not controversial. That is constitutional. Impeachment is not reserved for dramatic crimes committed in secret. It exists precisely for moments like this, when power is abused openly and normalized through repetition. The Constitution does not require a president to succeed in destroying democracy. It requires only that he attempt it. Designing a global authority that concentrates power in one individual, invites foreign money, bypasses Congress, undermines future presidents, and establishes hereditary succession checks every box. This is abuse of power in its purest form. Trump leveraged the credibility of the United States and the legitimacy of international law to construct a personal authority that answers to no one. He did so without congressional approval, without treaty ratification, and without public consent. That alone is sufficient. But it does not stop there. There is also the foreign entanglement problem, and it is impossible to ignore. A private entity led by a former president, funded by foreign governments paying billion-dollar fees, exercising influence over international outcomes, is the exact scenario the framers feared. This is why emoluments exist. This is why foreign payments to American leaders are restricted. Trump did not stumble into this conflict. He engineered it. Then comes the constitutional sabotage. By creating a parallel global structure that can outlast elections, Trump effectively insulates his influence from voters. Lose the White House, keep the throne, lose legitimacy, keep the leverage. That is not political competition. That is regime preservation. It weakens every future president by placing an unelected authority above the office itself. The world cannot ignore this because it sets a precedent that authoritarian leaders everywhere are watching closely. If an American president can privatize global governance, monetize access, and install a dynasty without consequences, the rules collapse for everyone. Why respect international law when loyalty and cash work faster? Why hold elections when permanence is more efficient? Trump is not acting alone. He is opening a door. This is why Democratic allies recoiled. This is why European leaders refused participation. They understand the danger of legitimizing a system that rewards obedience and punishes accountability. They have seen this movie before. It never ends well. Trump's defenders will call impeachment political. They always do. But impeachment is not punishment. It is containment. It is the mechanism by which a system defends itself against internal corrosion. Allow this to stand, and the next demagogue will not need imagination. He will simply copy the template. The final irony is brutal. This project was sold as peace. In reality, it destabilizes everything it touches, It replaces law with loyalty, cooperation with coercion, democracy with dynasty. It does not resolve conflict. It institutionalizes it. Impeachment is not revenge. It is a warning to Trump, to future leaders, to the world. Power is borrowed, not owned, and anyone who tries to turn it into an inheritance has forfeited the right to hold it.